What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Bass Fishing Declassified. In this video, we're talking mid-strolling techniques, and specifically alternatives to the standard jig head minnow that it seems like everyone's throwing nowadays. Let's get into it. A round ball jig head on a straight tail minnow, and specifically this Crush City freeloader, is basically the most popular mid-strolling bait right now on the market. And I've been throwing it quite a bit this past year, and I've had a lot of success on it. But on some recent fishing trips, I've noticed that the fish are not committing to it like they used to. And I thought at first it may have just been the day, but after many experiments and also talking to some of my friends who guide weekly and throw this bait a lot, we've been finding this bait has lost some of its effectiveness just because I feel like the fish are getting so conditioned to seeing this exact profile in motion. And so I've been experimenting with a bunch of different baits and ways to set up a mid-strolling technique that can be fished in the exact same situation as the ball head jig head and the freeloader, but give those fish a different look. Now, I was actually out on the lake yesterday, and it's the reason I wanted to make this video, because I started with that freeloader and only caught one fish and just had trouble getting a bunch of them to commit. So I switched over to something that I've been wanting to try for a while, and that's the 3.5-inch Hog Farmer Spun Shad on the 2/0 1/4-ounce tush hook from Core Tackle. The tush hook basically has all the weight down the shank of the hook and has a 60-degree line tie. Most standard ball head jig heads are going to have a 90-degree line tie, which just causes that bait to sit differently in the water than a 60-degree. And by having all the weight down the shank of the hook, you get more of a gliding motion when you put that tush into a straight tail bait like this Hog Farmer Spun Shad. I've been throwing this a ton on my Fishing Moment YouTube channel all year, but in the bigger size, basically throwing the 4/0 3/8-ounce tush in a 5.5-inch Hog Farmer Spun Shad. And last year, for some reason, I just never threw this exact combo, but I picked it up yesterday and I caught 5 fish on 5 casts on my first 10 casts. I made 3 or 4 casts and I caught 5 in a row. It was crazy. And this is right after struggling to get him to bite that freeloader. And the thing about this bait is that I don't think that it's necessarily that different from a profile standpoint, from the size of the bait or anything like that. It might be a tiny bit smaller, but I don't think that that made that big of a difference. I mean, the profiles aren't that much different, maybe a little bit smaller. I think the key though is that this bait falls differently and has different motion in the water, and I think that's so critical. A lot of guys that fish mid-strolling baits pick up a lot of these swim baits and straight tail baits from Japan because they have a different motion from what you can pick up here in the States. And I don't really like spending $20 on a pack of swim baits or $15 for one pack of 5 straight tail minnows. So I try to find more economical options, since that Hog Farmer Spun Shad is a bait that's easy to get, it's not that expensive, and it has been catching a ton of fish for me. And there's a bunch of baits here I'm going to show you that are more on the economical front that are super effective for mid-strolling. To give you an idea of how I'm fishing this bait though, it's not that complicated. Really, all I'm trying to do is work this bait at least 3 to 5 feet above the level of the fish that I'm seeing on my forward-facing sonar. I also catch a lot of fish in the summer on the tush with the Spun Shad without forward-facing sonar. What I do is I'll graph those fish with down imaging, side imaging, 2D sonar, determine where they're setting up, and if they're related to cover, how deep the water is. Then I'll count that bait down to a specific depth and then work that bait, trying to keep it again 3 to 5 feet above the level of where I think the fish are that I saw on my fish finder. So this isn't specifically a forward-facing technique per se, though that's how a lot of guys are doing it. And as long as you keep that bait 3 to 5 feet above those fish's head and you work it, I basically just give it small twitches with my rod, let it pause and kind of glide for a second, 3 or 4 or 5 twitches with the rod, let it fall and glide. They're going to come up and just basically come out of deeper water to come up and eat this thing, and they absolutely crush it. And I think also the darting motion of putting that weight inside of this bait causes it to have more of a gliding dart that is a different motion from what you get from a jig head minnow that rocks side to side more. And I just find that it's been getting me a lot more bites than a jig head minnow this year, both the smaller size from yesterday's trip and from earlier in the year when I was throwing the bigger size. Now, there are some other baits that I've tried this with over the years, and one I actually threw a lot last year that I had a lot of success with is a lot smaller bait. Now I would actually consider this a different profile bait from that freeloader. This is a little 3-inch baby Z2 from Strike King. It is an Elastec bait, and I actually pair this with a little bit smaller hook. This is the 2/4 ounce finesse tush. The finesse tush compared to the regular tush has a lighter weight hook. It is a little bit smaller hook, and it's better for smaller baits and more finessey presentations. But basically I put that finesse tush in that baby Z2, and you have the exact same thing happen. Basically that bait is going to glide and move, and actually it's interesting, there's a little hook slot on that baby Z2, and it will cause that weight when you insert it in the bait will cause the belly to flail out a little bit, and it has even more gliding action. The thing I like about this bait is that with that 1/4 ounce size and that smaller profile, it sinks faster than that Hog Farmer Spunk Shad, though the Hog Farmer Spunk Shad is great when those fish are like 20 feet of water and less. But if I'm fishing deeper than that, 30 feet or deeper, I'll go to that little baby Z2 on that 1/4 ounce tush, and it works really well. I also like the fact that these baits are not that expensive, and again, very easy to get. They're also made of Elastec, so they stretch, so you're not going to go through as many baits. And in general with that tush, you're not going to go through that many baits because it holds the bait on really well. And really, I can catch usually 5 to 10 fish per Spunk Shad like this, and a lot of times I can catch 15 fish on the Z2. The only thing that'll happen is that it'll start to stretch out and kind of lose its form after a bunch of fish catches, so you may have to switch it out every once in a while just if you're catching a ton of them, but from standard fishing you're not going to have any issues. Another way that I've been giving these fish a different look from your standard 4-inch freeloader style bait with a jig head is going to bigger profile minnows. And one that I've been throwing quite a bit recently is this Bastrix Duratrix 7-inch jerk minnow. I actually caught a 4-pounder on this yesterday, and I've been throwing the Depth Sakamata Shad as well as the Raid Super Fish Roller. The issue with those baits is that they're very expensive and you only get one fish basically per bait. So when you're spending, each bait's like almost $2, $3 per bait, which is really expensive, and I just don't like going through that many baits, spending that much money. They're also hard to get. And so I've been experimenting with this Bastrix jerk minnow, 7-inch jerk minnow, and I was having trouble actually getting them to bite it on a jig head. I know there are some guys that have been catching them with a jig head on this bait, but I haven't had as much success. The thing about this bait is that it has a wider body to it and a flat tail, so it tends to glide more on a jig head than actually rock. And one of the reasons I feel like this bigger bait doesn't have that good of an action on a jig head is just because of how flat the bottom of the bait is, and I feel like it does more of an up and down movement on a jig head rather than kind of gliding and roaming side to side. And the way that I've actually adjusted for that is pairing this with the Core Tackle 6/0 1/4 ounce HD hover rig. This is the weed guard version of this. I actually just take the weed guard off, so I'll just bend that weed guard and it'll just come out after you wiggle around enough. And this is the hook I'm putting in it. You basically just insert the hook into the bait and then you pull the nose over the top cone. If you guys haven't seen the hover rig before, it's on the packaging of how to rig it, but that 6/0 1/4 ounce is the perfect size. It fits perfectly in that 7-inch bait, and it gives it just enough weight so that that bait will still glide. It actually has a similar gliding motion to like the tush with the Spunk Shad, but if you let the line go completely slack and pop it, it sometimes will roll as well, a little bit side to side, which looks really nice in the water, and it has a completely different action than it does on a jig head. And actually, I hadn't been throwing this on the hover rig for whatever reason. I just didn't think about it until like 2 or 3 trips ago, and I started catching them really well on this. Again, caught a 4-pounder on this yesterday, and this has kind of unlocked something for me in the sense that there are some fish that don't want to eat this 4-inch bait. I don't know why. I found that when they're tighter to the bottom and tighter to cover, a lot of times they won't move off the cover enough to come eat this bait, especially the bigger fish, the 4, 5, 6-pounders. They won't really get as interested in this 4-inch minnow, especially as the water temperatures cool down, and they'll maybe come up a little bit off the bottom or away from a stump or something, look at it, and then just swim back down. But when you bring this bigger bait by their face, a 7-inch bait, I think it just has more flash, it has more presence, and they're gonna get a lot more interested. They come up right on top of it, they get really excited about it, and you can just notice fish on forward-facing sonar reacting completely different on this specific bait. Now, the thing I like about this bait is it's very durable. It's made of that Elastec material as well, which is really good for these mid-strolling baits. It causes them to float more and have more of that gliding natural fall. and they're a lot more economical. You can get a pack of 3 of these. These aren't cheap by any means, so it's still like $3 a bait. So it's about the same price per bait as those other baits I'm talking about. But because it's made of that Elastec, you can catch 10 fish on this bait compared to 1 fish. So the number of fish you can catch per bait is a lot more reasonable, I would say. And it's hard to find a minnow this size that's not expensive anyways, because it's just a big bait. But this is a sweet looking bait in the water. Guys, definitely need to try this if you haven't tried it already. I would highly recommend that 6/0 1/4 ounce HD hover rig in it. You want to use some stouter equipment because that HD hover rig comes with a stouter hook. So the way that I actually rig it up is on a pretty stout spinning rod with some thicker line. Right here I actually have some 15-pound, or I think it's 14-pound fluorocarbon as my leader, and I'm pairing that on 20-pound braided line for my main line, and then just tying that 14-pound fluorocarbon leader. And then I am throwing that on the Nolly Lithium Pro 7'4", medium heavy power, fast action spinning rod. So this has a fast action, which allows you to work that tip and get that bait to move erratically, but it's a pretty stout rod. I mean, it doesn't really bend that much into the rod. So when you lay into those fish, you're gonna be able to get a really good hook set and drive that hook home, which is important with this big bait. It's also a 7'4" rod, so it makes casting this big bait a lot easier. But that's kind of something I've been experimenting with as well. I've been throwing some other bigger minnows again and having success, but I'm just tired of going through packs and packs of 6 and 7 inch Sakamata shads and just going through literally hundreds of dollars a month of baits. I think that's ridiculous. I had to stop myself. They work super well, so I'm not saying they don't work. They work incredibly well. I just can't bring myself to throw them anymore. And so that's why I'm trying to go for more economical options, find stuff that's more readily available for myself, and stuff that's just different from what other people are throwing, which I think is always an advantage. If you can throw something that's a little bit different profile, something also is easier on the pocketbook, I think that that's a win-win all around. So hopefully you're enjoying this content, and definitely pick up some of these baits. You can use the links down in the Tackle Warehouse, or links to Tackle Warehouse down in the description below, and I'll have all this stuff linked there. So anyways, guys, hopefully you guys enjoy this video. If you did, leave a comment down below. Also like the video. We'll see you on the next one.